I would like to now call Dr. Simon for us to give his presentation. Dr. Simon is the Commercial Director of OLEG. I hope I'm pronouncing this correct. I did ask him for the right pronunciation. Yeah, I apologize if it's not. Right, so he will be speaking about public-private finance for decarbonizing energy. Dr. Simon is the Commercial Director. He is an experienced leader in energy industry with 30 years of industrial experience. He is certified practitioner in decision analysis and a member of the Society of Decision Professionals. He has previously been a distinguished lecturer for the Society of Petroleum Engineers and has a strong technical background with the ability to integrate multiple disciplines to deliver projects. He's currently working on hydrogen projects, both green and blue, CCS and biogas projects in the UK. And Dr. Simon is also currently studying for an MSc in energy policy at the University of Sussex. Welcome on board, Dr. Simon. The floor is yours for the next 20 minutes. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll just share my screen. Hopefully you should be able to see this. Can everybody see that?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. So I'm going to talk about public-private finance for the decarbonisation, and I'm going to talk about two technologies specifically: carbon capture and storage and hydrogen. The reason I'm choosing those two technologies is because currently the cost of carbon capture and storage and the cost of hydrogen means that without government support and government subsidy, both of those technologies are likely to experience what we would call market failure. I'll talk about the technologies broadly, and I'll talk about why they're expensive or a little bit on the numbers, and then I'll talk about what the UK government is trying to do to assist kickstarting the markets in those two areas. And the last talk was really helpful because it actually shows that both hydrogen and carbon capture are actually a very, very small part of the investment market at the moment, despite the amount of publicity around those two technologies. So, so carbon capture and storage is really a very simple idea. We try and capture carbon from hydrocarbon burning plants. We compress and transport that carbon dioxide by pipeline, and we store it underground, and it's permanently isolated. We can also ship that carbon dioxide by ship to other storage sites, or we can import the carbon dioxide and put it into the ground. The hydrogen economy. So I'm going to talk about the hydrogen economy. This one is green hydrogen, which is hydrogen from electrolysis. The idea is we generate renewable energy from solar or wind. Now that power can either go directly into the power grid, or we can use it to produce hydrogen. That hydrogen can be stored and transported. We can use it for transport. We can also export it by pipeline to a power plant, which we can use to both generate electricity, and we can also use the heat that's from the hydrogen that's used to produce the electricity to also provide district heating. We can also mix hydrogen with either natural gas or biogas to supplement that. So this is the hydrogen economy. The thing to know about the hydrogen economy is through this energy chain, there are losses in energy. So typically, if you use hydrogen in heating, you would be looking at about 50% losses. So it's about 50% efficient. For transport, for use in vehicles from what we call wind to wheel, it's about 30% efficient. So that gives you some clues about why it might be expensive. There are plans in the UK for integrated hydrogen and carbon capture projects. So this is an example very close to where I live. I live in Aberdeen, which is here. This is St Fergus, and at St Fergus we have natural gas coming into St Fergus. We're going to use that natural gas and convert it to hydrogen using steam method reformation. The carbon dioxide from that hydrogen is going to be pumped and stored offshore. And then that hydrogen is going to be put into our national gas grid and mixed with natural gas to decarbonise the gas. So that's a large project. The UK government have recently announced in 2021, just a few days ago, that they are funding 240 million funding to those hydrogen and carbon capture projects. But just to put that in perspective, in the United Kingdom, we're also currently spending 106 billion on a train line that goes from London to the north of England. So in reality, that 237 million is actually quite a small amount of investment at this stage. So I'll talk about hydrogen and the costs of hydrogen. What this graph shows here is the cost of hydrogen as a cost of dollars per kilo. It shows different technologies. On this side, we have blue hydrogen, natural gas reformation. On this side, we have electrolysis. Hydrogen, blue hydrogen from gas by steam reformation is currently the cheapest. Electrolysis is expensive. Cost per kilogram of hydrogen doesn't mean very much. So I'll put it in context by comparing it to the cost of electricity. So in the UK, the cost of electricity is about £35 per megawatt hour. Blue hydrogen prices in at somewhere between £50 and £100 per megawatt hour, depending on the size of the plant. Green hydrogen by electrolysis is much more expensive. Currently, based on our analysis of global projects, that is pricing in somewhere around 180 to £400 per megawatt hour. Average costs about £250 a megawatt hour. So hydrogen, comparative to electricity, is quite expensive. Now, bear in mind that hydrogen is a carrier energy. So it requires electricity to make it, and it requires gas to make it. So hydrogen can never be really cheaper than electricity or gas. 80% of the cost in the hydrogen is in the OPEX, and that's in the cost of the energy used to make it. So you can look at it a different way, and you can say, well, the value of using hydrogen is it that avoids carbon. There's a carbon abatement cost. So we can actually look at the price differential between hydrogen and electricity produced by using carbon sources. And we can look at that price differential. What's the incremental cost of the energy? And we can compare that against the carbon avoided. And in fact, if we divide those two out, the incremental cost of energy over the carbon avoided, we actually get the abatement cost of carbon. So to put that in perspective, if you charge, or if hydrogen costs $1 per kilo, that is equivalent to about $65 a ton of CO2. So currently hydrogen, you're paying hundreds to thousands of pounds per ton of carbon abated. So the cost of carbon abatement using hydrogen is quite expensive. And so we either need to increase carbon taxation, or we need to subsidize this factor until hopefully we can maybe bring costs down in the future. So that's how much it costs to abate carbon. This is on a logarithmic scale. It's actually a linear relationship. So for every pound it costs for hydrogen, it's about $65 a ton for a ton of CO2. So what are the actual fiscal models that the United Kingdom are trying to put in place? It's worth saying that none of this is agreed yet. These are proposals by the government on how they're going to subsidise hydrogen. So there are different models. There are regulated returns. The government regulates the price of hydrogen. There are premium payments that are placed to producers to encourage them to produce hydrogen. There's what we call contract for difference, which is the government pays for the difference of the market price of hydrogen, i.e. what the customer would pay, and the actual cost of hydrogen. So we can assume a base price roughly around the cost of electricity of around £35 per megawatt hour. So a good example is contract for difference with index. So the government contracts for the difference between the market price and the strike price to give a guaranteed rate of return to the investor. It's linked to the base stock of the gas or the electricity. So if we think about blue hydrogen, if we raise the price of the feedstock, then the owner investor in the project is compensated. The government has to pay more. But if the price of electricity or gas drops, then the investor will receive less funding. They will repay some of that money to the government. So this is really what the government are doing, is from taxation that they are funding the difference between hydrogen and the actual cost, the levelized cost to produce that hydrogen. So the market price is subsidized. Another example of this is that in the UK, there's regulation, and the regulation places an obligation on energy providers to make sure that a certain percentage of their mix is renewable energy. And the one that's in place at the moment is something called the UK Renewable Fuel Obligation Certificate. So companies, and this is on the suppliers, companies that produce more than 450,000 litres of fuel must use green fuels. 20% of that mix, which is increased every year, must be green. So obligated suppliers must meet their obligation. And the way that's done is you either produce enough green fuel that you receive a certificate that says you've produced that green fuel, which then relieves you of the obligation. However, if you're not making green fuel, you can buy yourself out of the obligation. So you pay the government a certain amount of money. It's roughly around about 30 pence a litre for a certificate you have to buy. So you're essentially fined for not producing that renewable fuel. So hydrogen now qualifies for these renewable transport fuel certificates. And in fact, if you make a kilo of hydrogen, you can claim 9.16 certificates. Those green certificates are tradable. So somebody who's not producing renewable fuel can buy that certificate. It's very, very similar to the European trading scheme for carbon. So roughly the buyout for that certificate is 30 pence certificate. It's going to rise to 50 pence certificate this year. Now that provides a subsidy of about £5 a kilo for hydrogen, which is quite significant. The cost of making green hydrogen in the UK is 10 to 15 pounds. So that's giving a subsidy on green hydrogen of £5 a kilo. Now there are certain circumstances that we call the development fuel obligation, where that certificate rises to £8 a certificate. Those renewable transport fuel certificates can be traded in the same way as any other commodity. Currently, the market price for that is around about 25% a certificate. So if we look at that against the cost, what we're really saying is that this is potentially the market price. This is the buyout price, the value of a renewable transport fuel certificate. So as a consequence, there is a subsidy. Now for blue hydrogen, that means that blue hydrogen becomes commercial for an investor. So the renewable transport fuel certificate is worth about £65 a megawatt hour. Green hydrogen, we're getting some of a subsidy, but green hydrogen is still quite expensive. So there is still going to be a premium on green hydrogen compared to a comparable cost of just using electricity directly. So by varying the obligation and the price of the certificates, we vary the subsidy for that fuel. I'll talk about carbon capture and storage. So carbon capture and storage, the government proposal in the UK is to actually separate it into two clear business streams. One is on the capture side and one is on the transport and storage side. On the capture side, it's proposed to be very similar to hydrogen, that it will be a contract for difference. So the government will essentially bridge the gap between the current trading price, the certificate price for carbon, the European trading price, which, because we've left Europe, is due to change in the UK, but at the moment it's the European trading price. They will subsidise the difference between what carbon certificates trade at and how much it is actually costing us to capture that carbon. The government also incentivises flexible generation of power plants by providing two payments. They actually give a premium payment for making sure that you have low carbon availability, and another one to incentivize power carbon capture plants to dispatch ahead of unabated power. So they pay a premium to make sure energy suppliers will supply either green energy or energy that has carbon capture attached to it before we use any other energy. And so those suppliers will get a premium. On the other side is the transport and storage. So once we've captured it, it's then put into a transport network and a storage network. So the proposal in the UK is to regulate that. So the UK will dictate a fair price for transporting and storage of the carbon, such that any transport and storage company gets a guaranteed price. This means that all people who are capturing carbon are guaranteed a maximum price they will have to pay, although carbon and transport and storage companies are able to be competitive in that market. But it will be a regulated price. So there will be a maximum that you can charge for transport and storage, and that will be based on what they think is a reasonable cost for transport and storage. So it'll be entirely regulated. So we're really looking at two parts. One is capture, one is transport and storage. Capture will be contract for difference. Transport and storage will be a regulated market. So they're actually going to look at this in two ways. So one is the first way we'll look at is capture for industrial. So that's anything that's being produced by factories, steel industry, cement industry. So for industrial capture, it will be a contract for difference. That contract for difference will attract tradable CCS certificates. So there'll be an obligation to decarbonize the industry, and that will attract tradable CS certificates. So if you don't capture carbon dioxide, again, you'll have to buy out. And then on the transport side, it will be just the same. So the transport and storage will still be regulated. So there'll be a CO2 reference price and there'll be a tradable CCS certificate. So the government view is how will this progress? So how is this going to evolve over time? So in phase one, the government want to use an industrial contract for difference with upfront capital support. So they're going to provide capital grants to install capture equipment to capture the carbon, and then they'll contract for difference. So they will pay the difference between the market price of carbon and the traded certificate. As the market evolves, they want to transition completely to a competitively allocated contract for difference. So that means that rather guaranteeing it, companies will compete for a minimum contract for difference. And then phase three will be completely market-based approach. So we remove all government support, and companies will be investing in carbon capture and storage purely on the basis of the existing market or the traded market for certificates. So that's how the government in the UK see it developing. What does that mean in reality? So here I've got a graph which is a compilation of carbon capture and storage projects from all around the world. This is how much it's costing for each one of those projects to capture carbon at a price of pounds per tonnes equivalent of CO2. And the first thing you'll notice is the cost of carbon capture varies wildly. It depends on the industry. It depends how difficult it is to capture the carbon. It depends whether you're sequestrating that carbon onshore or offshore. In the UK, all our carbon capture is proposed to be offshore, which puts cost. And this is the current average European trading price from last year at £26 per tonne of CO2. And so you can see as the trading price of carbon shifts, we start to price in carbon capture projects. The thing to notice is that price, the price of the emissions permit or the certificate allowing you to emit carbon dioxide is very variable. It's been as low in 2016 to 2018. It was as low as this is actually in euros, €5 on this graph. And currently, I think it's, when I looked yesterday, it's almost at €40 per tonne. So the carbon certificate price, the carbon trading price is coming up. And as that price comes up, carbon capture and storage projects become more attractive. But until that price comes up, government needs to subsidise the difference through either a contract for difference or a capital grant. So what are the conclusions of my talk? I've just got about a minute and a half left. I think the first thing to know is that carbon capture and hydrogen currently economically are comparatively expensive. Hydrogen is an expensive energy, and carbon capture and storage is a relatively expensive way of dealing with CO2. To stimulate the market, the government are subsidising that market, and there are a variety of fiscal models that can be done. Capital grant allocation, to give grants to companies to install equipment. Contract for difference, where the gap between existing energy and the new energy is bridged. So there'll be a market price, there'll be a cost, and the government will pay the difference. As the market evolves, the UK government hope, as we move more to a dynamic market, that price supply equilibrium will kick in and they can remove some of that support. They're also looking at utilising carbon certificates. The cost of carbon probably has to come up. Again, they'll use a contract for difference. What's the cost of abating carbon? What's the value of the certificate? And they'll subsidise between the two. And then finally, on the transport and storage side for carbon, they're looking at a regulated market. So in the UK, the government are proposing to dictate how much a company can charge for the transport and storage and guarantee that over a long period. The big problem with carbon dioxide is it needs to be stored for a long time, and somebody needs to continue monitoring that. So the government needs to guarantee to the storage, transport and storage companies that they can get a guaranteed return. The government are negotiating with the private investor to determine what an appropriate return on investment is and what the contract for difference contracts should look like. So what should contract difference? What is the value of that? So that concludes my talk. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Simon, for the lovely presentation. If I could ask for you to please stay with us until the end of the presentation so that we can take the questions from the audience.